To get started on our nature weaving, I'm going to go outside and pick out some sticks to use for the frame. These are the sticks I chose out of my yard. I'm going to put them together to make a frame for my weaving. So it's okay if the sticks are not exactly the same shape and size as each other, but I do want them to be mostly straight and close to the same size. Then I'm going to use some string to bind the corners together. Arrange the sticks so they make a frame. Now you'll need to attach the corners together. I'm using a piece of yarn to do this. To start with, I pass my yarn underneath one of the sticks. Then I'm going to tie it in a knot by making a loop and going through the loop, just like you're tying your shoe. Pull it tight, and then do another knot so that you'll have a double knot and your string will be secure. It helps when you make this first knot to leave a bit of a tail there. I'm going to lift that out of the way and set it aside. Now I'm going to take the long side of the yarn and I'm going to wrap it around both of these sticks, going sort of diagonally across both of them so that they are bound together really tightly. I'll go around this way a few times, and then I'm going to go around in the other direction so that my yarn is making the shape of an X across the sticks. As I do this, I'm trying to keep the yarn pretty tight so that it can hold the sticks really well. When you feel like you've gone around the sticks enough that they're staying together pretty well, bring the end of your yarn up to where you left that first little bit of yarn, where we first tied it, where that tail is. And we're just going to tie these two together. So we're going to cross them, make a loop, and go through the loop, and then pull that tight. And then we're going to make a double knot, so do that again. Cross them, make a loop, and go through and pull it tight. Repeat that step of wrapping the corners with the yarn on the other three corners until your whole frame is holding together well. To prepare for the weaving, we'll have to add the warp string. Look at your frame and decide how you want it to be oriented as you add the warp string. This is the string I'm using for my warp. You could also use yarn if you don't have this kind of string. To start, I'm going to wrap it around the bottom of the frame on one of the sides. I'm going to tie it and then loop around and tie it a second time so I have a double knot. Now I'll stretch the string up to the top of the frame, stretch it over and around to the other side of the stick, and I'm going to basically be zigzagging across this loom. If you wanted to, you could double wrap around the stick to kind of help the strings stay in place better, but this actually ended up working pretty well for me. Depending on how much string you have, you may have more or fewer zigzags than I ended up with. Also, you'll want to make sure that you're holding the string rather tight as you wrap this around the top and bottom sides of your loom so that you have good tension in the string. Once you're at the end of the loom, you'll need to tie the string securely. I wrapped it an extra time around the stick at the bottom, and then I took the tail end of the string, put it under that last warp string, and then put the tail through the loop that was created. Pull that tightly and scooch it down. And then we're going to do that same thing again. Take the tail end, go under the last warp string, and put the tail through the loop that is created. Tighten it and scoot the knot down, and then you can trim the extra. And this stayed securely the whole time that I was doing my weaving. Now that our warp string is secure, we're ready to start weaving. Choose a color to start weaving with. Pass the end of the yarn underneath the side of your frame, cross the yarn over itself and make a loop and go through the loop. Then this will make your first knot. You want to make a second knot, so go ahead and do that so you've got a nice secure double knot. As we begin weaving, you have to remember the pattern of over, under, over, under. Start by passing the yarn over the first warp string and then under the next. Continue this pattern as you move across the loom by going over and under and over and under. When you get to the end, pull the rest of your string all the way through, making sure it doesn't tangle. Then you might want to scoot the yarn up. And when you weave back the other way, you need to do the opposite thing. So look at these. Here I went over the string last time and under that string. So this time around, I'm gonna make sure I loop underneath that frame. And with my yarn, I'm gonna go over and then under, over and then under. So I'm still repeating the pattern, but I'm making sure that I'm doing the opposite thing that I did in the last pass to the warp string. After finishing a row, I like to tighten up the yarn to make sure it's secure. And it's important that we do go around the stick on the side because that will help hold the shape of what we're doing. Continue to go back and forth, weaving using the over-under pattern, tightening the yarn as you go, and scooting the yarn up as you add more layers. You'll notice if you look a little more closely at the weaving, now that we have a few rows, that the yarn is making a certain pattern against the warp string. And you can tell that each time I pass across my loom, I'm doing the opposite thing to each warp string, alternating my overs and my unders. When you get to the end of your original string, you're going to want to add another string. It could be the same color or different. To add those together, you want to line up the new end with the old end, make a loop, pass the tail of both threads through the loop, and pull it tight. You can then trim this tail a little bit, as long as you don't trim too close. Now you're ready to begin weaving again, just like before, with your overs and your unders. And that little tail that we created when we added the new piece of string, usually you can just sort of manipulate that and make it face backward or towards the back of your weaving, and it won't really show up when all is said and done. Once you've got the basics down, you can just keep weaving back and forth, adding different colors as you go, until your entire loom is filled with weaving. You'll also start to notice, if you're doing your weaving right, that the warp strings start to disappear. That's a great way to know that you're doing your overs and your unders correctly. Here's another close look at how the weaving is done just from another angle. I pass the yarn over a thread, then under, then over, and under until you get to the end and loop around the stick. Make sure that at the end of each row you pull the slack all the way through so that there aren't any loops of yarn. When you are totally done weaving, you'll need to secure your last bit of yarn to the stick. We'll be basically doing exactly what we did when we finished wrapping the warp thread when we made the loom. We're going to double wrap that last bit of yarn around the stick so it's got an extra loop around. Then I'm going to pass the tail end of the yarn under this last row of weaving. Leave some space there because we're going to pass the tail of the yarn through that open space or that little loop that we've created. Pull the yarn down to tighten it. And then you're going to repeat that last step where you pass the tail end of the yarn under the last row of weaving, create a loop, and pass the tail end of the yarn through the loop. Tighten that down so that you end up with a nice double knot. Now before you trim that extra thread, let me show you how you can tuck it in. See how this makes a little passageway, a little tunnel? You can just sort of open that up and make the end of that yarn go through that tunnel, pull it. That'll hide that tail. Now you can take your scissors and carefully put them close to the weaving and snip. And you can just sort of hide that little bit of the tail. So that's secured up inside the weaving and it gives you a nice clean edge. Now that your edges are secure and tucked away, you are all done with your weaving. This could be hung up and displayed, or you could think of some other ways to use it. I hope you enjoyed making your nature weaving. Thank you so much for watching.